All right. We're going to have to dust off a little bit of the cobwebs. Try and cast our minds back to everything that you learned in Bereshit chapter 1. And we started to go through the process of, okay, this is the creation story. This is what God did as he started to bring out of chaos order. Everything set up according to his will. And we were able to look back at, remember the first line, and see some of the prophetic implications of where Yeshua was from the beginning to understand John's opening statement a little better. So now chapter 2 kicks us into another gear as we go from sort of a broad spectrum of here I am and I'm bringing everything into order. Now he's going to peel it apart and he's going to go, okay, now we're going to take a much closer view of what that looks like. All right? It says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished along with everything in them. On the seventh day God was finished with his work which he had made. So he rested on the seventh day from all of his work which he had made. God blessed the seventh day and separated it as holy, because on that day God rested from all of his work which he had created, so that it itself could produce. So we're sitting here and we see, all of a sudden the seventh day gets marked out and he says, this is something holy. Now help me understand that again. What is holiness? Set apart for what? Right, so something that is belonging to him, but remember the definitions, or let me not say definitions. What do the angels say when they're in the presence of God? Holy, holy, holy. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. So what happens is this becomes an attribute of his. It's not just separated to him, but it reflects him. Okay? So when you understand that Shabbat is something that is set apart to him because it is of him. When you keep it, what are you saying? I am separated because to you, and I'm reflecting you. And what do we see? That what did he do on the seventh day? He rested, right? Was God tired?
No.
Okay, so why would we say, okay, it's good to rest on Shabbat?
So that we can reflect him.
Right. Okay. And what was the point of this resting, do you think?
To spend quality time with him.
For us, yes. For him?
Oh, for him.
Okay. Reflection on?
It's creation.
Right. Okay. So if God takes the time on his day and he focuses on his creation, the correct response is creation should busy focusing on him. Right? Many people out there will look at it and they go, oh, well, Shabbat. And I've heard, sadly, many a pastor have this discussion saying, the Sabbath that is mentioned in the Ten Commandments is difficult from the Sabbath in creation. Guys, it's the same word. So he says, when we understand that it's not a Mount Sinai reality, but Shabbat is a creation reality. When you worship the Creator, this is part of that element that I'm going, okay. As he created me in his image, now for me to be that Tselem, remember what we use in modern Hebrew Tselem to be? Yeah, dust off the cobwebs, right? Tselem. Tselem was to be a photocopy. Okay? This is where modern Hebrew borrows from the biblical and they go, okay, what's a really good word for a proper copy of something? And they went back to Genesis and then they said, we're a copy of God. So a proper photocopy is someone who this is his image. Right? And if this is important to him, then it becomes important to us. If he's busy focusing on me, if God comes and he says, sit at my feet, my child, I want to have one-on-one time with you. I want to walk in the garden. I want to have that quiet spot. The natural response should be, that's such an amazing invitation. I get to sit at the feet. I get to walk with God this day. I get to focus on him. I get to learn about him. I get to see him work. And if you keep that in the back of your mind, when you see Yeshua walking into synagogue every Shabbat, performing healing after healing, never breaking the mitzvah, but in fact showing the true intent and the heart condition. of what this gift is. We spoke a lot about Shabbat last time, but we get to those terms where Shabbat, man was not made for Sabbath, but Sabbath was made for man. Again, it's a gift for you. It was an invitation from a king or a creator to say, listen, would you not want to set this time apart with me? And he adds to that and he says, well, while we're doing it, it's not just an individual response. Guys, I want to do it corporately. This becomes a holy convocation time. This becomes a time where we can gather and we can focus as Yeshua did. And our intent, in a sense, is what 12-year-old Yeshua would teach us. When his parents lost him for a moment. Can you imagine having that responsibility? And we only got the Messiah. Where is he? Oh, he's somewhere here in the caravan. And then a couple of days later, we found out he's not. Yeah. I'm just going to go back to God and tell him I lost the Messiah. Hang on a second. And eventually, we find him in the temple having these discussions. And what was his response to his parents after they freaked out? Didn't you know I would be in my father's house being about my father's business? A 12-year-old showing us kingdom dynamics is, I'm about daddy's business. And to be established in this kingdom, in this creation, this from chaos to order, reality, so that the world could produce, so that life could begin, so that you could exist. That he brings you to this place and he goes, it's Shabbat, are we going to be about daddy's business? It's Passover, are we going to be about daddy's business? You see, it's not just something you attend. It's something that is ingrained in a kingdom dynamic because I am my father's son, because you are daddy's daughter. It comes down to this is what we do because who we are. And it's always been that level of invitation. If you would just put aside all maybe the differences or the issues or whatever else that we use to separate ourselves from convocating and just go, well, am I going to be about daddy's business? Yes or no? And we grab hold of this invitation. It says in verse 4, here is the history. And remember this word toldot, the origins, the history, the genealogies. This is a theme in Bereshit. He's going, this is how I did it. History of the heavens and the earth when they were created. On the day when Adonai God made heaven, or made earth and heaven, there was yet no wild bush on the earth, and no wild plant had yet sprung up. For Adonai God had not caused it to rain on the earth, where there was no one to cultivate the ground. Rather, a mist went up from the earth, which watered the entire surface on the ground. So the vegetation were watered by a mist. Rain pops up really with Noah. Then Adonai God formed a person, or Adam. Okay? Better translated as man, mankind. From the dust of the ground, dust, Adamah. It's an interesting little word play. If we look at, I thought I would leave this on for a second session, but I'm probably not going to. We'll redraw. If I look at the word Adam, okay, Aleph, Dalet, Mem, and he came from the Adamah. There's really one letter difference. Okay, if Hebrew is not if you've not studied this letter and this letter are the same. It's just when it happens at the end of the word, it changes shape, right? Okay, so don't get confused. That's still a mem. Adam ma is a hey that gets added from the dust. Okay? So we see, again, by word association, we can understand where man came from. Number one. If we were to look at it at slightly deeper meaning, we would say, like, from the dust, God would reveal mankind. The hay would give you a sense in the paleo of, this is what I'm going to show you, in a sense. But it's deeper than that, because this letter we find in God's name twice. One of his titles. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. So what does he continue to reveal when it comes to mankind? In a sense. And so on, we'll start to foreshadow, we'll start to see pictures of, hang on a second, the revelations of Yeshua, the revelations of Yud, He, Vav, He have to do with a hand and a nail. It has to do with the revelation of man and how God's redemptive plan is there. Okay? So, if you missed everything on that point, I want you to think of this one simple picture. He separates everything so he can get dust. And he can take the dust and he can go, and out popped you. One simple moment or breath from the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, created one of the most complex beings we've ever even tried to understand. I mean, with all of medicine and all of technology and how far we've come, you can still go to a doctor and say, explain to me how eyelids are formed. And he will look at you and go, we don't know. He will just go, I know when it happens. Why do they part this way and not that way? We don't know. We just know that it does. And we miss, again, God going through these little moments of, as the psalmist said, knitting you together in your mother's womb. Being created in my image so that you can reflect me in the world. But remember, without God, we're just dust, just soil. But with the Ruach, you become a living being. Right? And it's not just the complexities of the physical that I'm talking about. The spiritual attributes we'll get into in a bit. So, it says, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life so that he became a living being. Verse 8 says, Adonai, God, planted a garden towards the east in Eden. Eden. Okay? What is Eden? What does it mean? Yeah, no, you see, that's the thing. When it's gan in Hebrew, you're talking about a garden. When it talks about Eden, we're talking about paradise. Okay? It says, and there, but the person whom he had formed, out of the ground, Adonai God caused to grow every tree pleasing in appearance and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, those good old questions of if God knew we were going to eat of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, why did he put it there in the first place? Right, free will. And there's a difference, right, between if God wanted robots, he could have made us without it. But remember, this is an invitation. This is, will you choose me for eternity? This is, here I am. Will you obey the mitzvah, the instructions? Right? And this is about God setting up a redemptive story. A river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it divided into 4 streams. So from 1 into 4. Okay? we could maybe just take a little pit stop and go, well, isn't it interesting that 4 normally represents one of God's titles? Yud, He, Vav, He. It is almost as if all life is coming or stemming from Him. The name of the first is Pishon. It winds through the hills of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of the land is good. Aromatic resin and onyx stone are also found there. Do you guys have a different translation for aromatic resin? Say again? Bdellium. Okay. It says, the name of the second river is Gihon. It winds through the land of Cush. The name of the third river is Tigris. It is the one that flows toward the east of Ashur. And the fourth is the river Euphrates. On a very basic level, I mean, many people have tried to track this. Where do these rivers more or less coincide? If you were to look today. Right, Middle East side of things. And it's kind of, okay, if this is where Eden was, isn't it interesting where that's sort of is mostly where the story gets played out all the way to Revelations? Okay? Adonai God took the person and put him in the Garden of Eden to cultivate and care for it. Adonai God gave the person this order. You may freely eat from every tree in the garden except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You are not to eat from it, because the day you eat from it, it will become certain that you will die. All right, now we've got some interesting ideas about what that means. What do you think that means? Okay. So something that is completely contrary to God will enter in, okay, and we can discuss that obviously when they do break that, it brings in the fall. The fall of man, fall of creation, and so on. But did they die as soon as they touched it?
No, not physically.
Okay, so God was lying.
No,
But it must have been something in the spirit.
Or?
the spirit man was covering them.
Okay.
And that 1,000 years.
You see, then now we.
The day was over, they did that.
Now we draw theological threads, and I'm not saying those aren't there, but if we look to the Bible to determine the Bible, someone go to 1 Kings chapter 2. We're going to read from verse 37. I'll read from verse 36. 1 Kings 2:36 says, the king summoned Shimei and said to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and live there. Don't go outside the city walls. Know for a fact that on the day you go out and cross the Wadi Kidron, you will certainly die. Sound familiar? You do this, you will die. Your blood will be on your own head. Shimei answered the king, what you have said is good. As my lord king has said, so will your servant do. So Shimei lived in Jerusalem for a long time. But after 3 years, 2 of Shimei's slaves ran away and went to Achish, son of Maachah, king of Gath. They told Shimei, your slaves are in Gath. So Shimei set out, saddled his donkey, and went to Achish in Gath and to look for his slaves. Then Shimei returned, bringing his slaves from Gath. Did he cross the Wadi? Did he die? Solomon was told that Shimei had gone from Jerusalem to Gath and back. The king summoned Shimei and said to him, didn't I have you swear by Adonai and forewarn you by telling you, know for a fact that on the day you leave or go anywhere outside the city, you will certainly die? And you answered me, what you're saying is good. I hear it. Why then haven't you kept the oath of Adonai and the mitzvah, the instruction I charged you with? Moreover, the king said to Shimei, you know in your own heart all the terrible things you did to David my father. Therefore Adonai will bring back your wickedness on your own head. But King Solomon will be blessed, and the throne of David will be established forever, Adonai, or established before Adonai forever. So the king gave the order to Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he went and he struck him down so that he died. Thus the kingdom was established in Solomon's hands. Okay, so sometimes we have Hebraic expression. You do this, this penalty will come. Right? On the day you do it, you bring the blood upon your head. Okay? I'm not trying to nullify the other interpretations. All right? But I also am saying, it says the Hebraic expression, on that day, you will certainly die, is the day you do it, you have committed the sin, you have signed your own death penalty. And we see it play out that way. Okay? So back into Genesis. Verse 18. Adonai God said, isn't it good that it isn't good that the person should be alone. I will make for him a companion suitable for helping him. Okay, now this is an interesting term. It's called Ezer Kenegno. Right? And it basically translates down to a helper that is suitable, or it's probably one of the better translations, a companion. Okay? Now, let me read to the end of the chapter and we'll break that up. Just remember the word Ezer Kenegno. For helping him. Verse 19. So from the ground, Adonai God formed every wild animal and every bird that flies in the air, and he brought them to the person to see what he would call them. Whatever the person would call each living creature, that was to be its name. Okay? So the person gave names to all the livestock, to the birds in the air, and to every wild animal. But for Adam, it was not found a companion suitable for him. Right. So, this is an interesting lesson. God says it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make for him a suitable helper or a companion. And then he goes to proceed to make animals. Anybody thinking, I don't understand where we went from that point to this point? But as we well understand, if Yeshua reflects his Father perfectly and Yeshua operated in a rabbinic role, his job was to teach. Correct? So when the Father comes in and Yeshua reflects his Father perfectly, when he does something, he's teaching you a lesson. So he goes in, for you to understand, it's not good for you to be alone. Well, I'm going to make these. And as you go through them, naming them, you're going to look at them and you're going to come to the grand conclusion. Hang on a minute. Why do you all get friends and where's mine? Something's missing. Here's the problem. What is the bigger lesson that he's trying to teach Adam? Okay. But Adam should have been able to maybe turn back and go, in whose image am I made in? I'm having this conversation with my God. We're walking in the garden. We're not like this, but we're like this. But he goes, you're still not getting the intimate details of this. You're still not getting the fullness of that point. So for you to understand that, I'm going to have to create for you a suitable companion. Okay? So God is trying to help him understand, look, this is the deeper part of the relationship. This is what I'm going to try to allude to, and I'm jumping the gun here, but he will talk to them about being echad, a oneness, which I believe came into the topic of discussion sometime over the last 2 weeks. And then he goes, oh, what really is that? And that's what I want to explore today. Then God calls the deep sleep to fall upon the person. While he was sleeping, he took one of his ribs, closed it up in place from where it took it with flesh. The rib which Adonai God had taken from the person, he made a woman person, and he brought her to the man person. Okay, now the CJB renders it quite funny, right? And the reason it does that is because he's trying to stick to probably the literalist translation as you can get. He created man, right? And man is again Aleph, Yud, Shin. Translated as Ish. Right? He creates woman person. It's Aleph, Yud, Shin, Hey. Isha. Right? So just like Adam and Adamah, where did you come from? And then we have again further revelation of God. You with me? Now there's an interesting little dynamic here. If I were to take God out of this equation, I would take the Yud, his first letter, out, and I would take the Hey out. I would be left with another Hebrew word. Ish. That equals fire. You take God out of a marriage and you've got nothing but destruction. You take God out of man, you left nothing but destruction. And you don't have to look far to understand what I'm talking about. Okay? So he says, this is what I've created, and I have given or brought this Isha to the Ish. Verse 23, the man person said, at last, this is bone from my bone and flesh from my flesh. She is to be called woman Isha, because she was taken out of man, Ish. This is why a man is to leave his father and mother and stick with his wife, and they are to become one flesh. Isn't that an interesting statement? Man is to leave. Yet, if we were to misunderstand this a little bit, we might look at the ancient Galilean custom and we go, hang on a second, but the groom goes out and he fetches the bride and brings her to his house, which is built onto daddy's house. Isn't it supposed to be that the man would leave and go to his bride? According to that understanding? Or is it that I finally need to understand that there has to be a level of separation, that I have become now responsible for this person? I was part of that household, but I now have to take a step away and realize, hang on a second, this is something new. I am now of the Basar Echad, one flesh, and this becomes now my responsibility. I want to pause there. I know there's only one verse. Oh, let me read the last verse then. It says, they were both naked, and the man and his wife, they were not ashamed. Okay, it's an interesting thing, but again, in Hebrew, it kind of has this funny wordplay that when we talk about I will expose your nakedness, it's really about your shame. All right? So when they realize that they are naked, they're actually acknowledging, in a sense, in Hebraic thinking that, listen, I'm now acknowledging my sin. I've now acknowledged that I've fallen. I've now acknowledged that something's wrong. In this case, everything is as it should be. Right. I want to talk a little bit about the suitable helper, right? Because we're probably going to go into a little bit of marriage counseling today. Or should I say more marriage discussions. If we take a look at this, Ezer Kenegno, this helper suitable? And we say, oh, okay, well, it was taken from the rib. What do we understand the order of God to be? According to Ephesians and so on, it's Christ, it's husband, then it's wife. So therefore, if you take a part from the original, it somehow gets translated as less than. Okay? When we use terms, and we'll get into that a little bit, is like, well, now, ladies, it is your responsibility to submit. And even saying that, there's an immediate negative connotation to what I'm saying. But that's not the biblical narrative, okay? Not the way we generally expect it. Submission in that context means I have to be accountable to. Everything you do affects the person you've been joined to. And men, if you read back a little bit in Ephesians, which we're going to go through just to make sure, is that it says submit to one another in love. Well, if I'm submitting to one another and I'm submitting to Christ, it seems like I have the majority share of submission in this relationship. But we have to correct an understanding. Now, when we talk about this Ezer, or this helper, would you guys see a helper as someone less than the person they're helping?
It should be just as important.
Right. I will need you to understand that that term Ezer is applied to God himself in many functions. Ezer, it means the helper. Okay? Never mind the Holy Spirit as well. Would I then say that this Isha, or Eve, is less than Adam?
No.
When you've been giving the attributes of God himself and the Holy Spirit. Let's look at a couple of verses. Let's go to Exodus 18 verse 4. Someone go there and read it for me.
The name of the other was Eliezer, where he said, the Elohim of my father was my help,
Right.
and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh.
Eliezer in itself means God is my help. And then he goes further and he said, God is my help. That is that same Ezer. So ladies, the function in which you have is to, again, in this relationship we call one flesh or marriage, is to mimic God in your help. Now I want you to start to think of, well, how does that work? How then am I supposed to go, if God is my help, how can I be that for him? All of a sudden, you're not feeling very submissive, right? We're not even focusing that frame of thought. It's not like now I'm less than and I have to listen to what he says and I have to obey everything he says. We're going to get to that part. It's a little bit more difficult. But the reality is now all I'm studying is a function, and if this function is for me is to reflect God in this relationship, how then do I make him, in a sense, better? How then do I guide him? How then do I comfort him? How then do I perhaps give him an invitation to say, hey, listen, have you thought about this? Have you prayed about this? Have you sought the will of the Father? Let me sit and pray with you, maybe. And Yeshua takes it a step further, and he goes to John 14. And we're going to see this twice in the same chapter. So verse 16, I'm going to read from 15. John 14, verse 16 is what we're going to focus on. And he says, if you love me, you will keep my commands, my instructions. So obedience is always a love thing. It should be. Remember I shared with you an example of, the difference between daddy coming home and he says to his son, listen, my boy, I've had a really rough day. Could you just please take the black bag out and put it there? It's pretty stinky. And if the son loves the father, he will go, oh, Dad, it's really good to see you. Sure, shame, you must have, it's a tough time. Let me do this for you, Dad. Can I make you a coffee? Go sit down, Dad, I got this. His love for his father will motivate him to do something. He will go, but I was watching TV and I don't really feel like it. And why are you always telling me what to do? If we get to that place and we know the heart condition or the intent is focused on what? More himself. He loves himself more than he loves his father. Now, in an instance, one thing can go from an instruction to law, depending on the heart condition of the son. You with me? So when God gives us an invitation and he says, well, this is life to you, this is good for you, this is a blessing for you, this is how you separate yourself from the world, showing them that you belong to me. And we go, no, I think I'd rather go shopping. The heart condition is where we get it wrong. And because our heart condition is wrong, our level of submission gets really lagged behind. Submission is a gift, guys and ladies. If I have to submit to my king, as I ought to because he saved me, and I said I give up my old life so that I can have this new life, and he says, if you do, you walk with me. I will love you, I will guide you, I will never leave you, I'm here. But I'm going to ask you to do things you're probably not comfortable with. Are you going to trust me enough? We're going to go, okay, I'll help me with that because I might struggle a little bit, but okay. And as you mature, you learn that God's best is your best. So we become quicker, hopefully, at our level of submission. When God gives us an invitation to a festival, we don't go, oh, here we go again. We're going to have to sit and listen to Vince talk about it for the next 4 days, and then we're going to have to go have supper, and then it's going to be late, and we're going to get home at 11 o'clock, and then it's a Shabbat, and we can't go shopping, and what happens if it's a double Sabbath? Oh, man.
Like today.
We need to check our heart condition. If we go, if Father gives me an invitation to sit at his feet, why would I in my right mind reject that invitation? We have to continually check in that heart condition. If you love me, you will keep my commands. And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another comforting counselor like me, the Spirit of truth, to be with you forever. Now that word, that counselor, is parakletos. It is also used in Greek as helper. It is the Hebrew, again, an equivalent of Ezer. So the Holy Spirit is there going to be your helper. Just like Eve is to be that helper too. Verse 26, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. We're going to read from verse 25. I have told you these things while I am still with you, but the Counselor, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything. That is, he will remind you of everything I have said to you. Again, this is going to be your parakletos. This is going to be your helper. Now, perhaps maybe we get stuck in the fact of thinking somehow we become less than, and I have to think of I have to submit, and I forget then my role as his help, whether he understands it or not. When sometimes God gives you an instruction and you don't fully understand, and you only find out later how much better this is. But how does God deal with you, generally speaking? The Holy Spirit, how does he deal with you? Does he come in and bash you over the head with a rolling pin and say, you will, all the time? Does he break you down before he gets you to a point where you will listen? Or does he generally come in and give a nudge and say, you know what you should be doing? Come on, I'm going to help you get through this. I know you can't see through the muck right now. Let me be your eyes, or just hold on to me until you find your feet. I know you're struggling. Let me be the one who's going to bring in the stability in your life. Because God has done that for us, I don't know how many times. Lord, how am I going to get through this? Ladies, sometimes your husbands are looking up and then they don't know the answer to that question. And all they need from you is, listen, just hold on to me. We're going to take one step at a time because we know God's got this. Right?
It's in fact that way by design, isn't it? Because out of the rib of man,
Right.
so the woman is putting back something which God himself has decided the man will feel, and the woman is putting it back. So by design, she is a supportive propping up. Think about your rib cage, like she's always there close to the heart. So
Let's get back into that. Of all the bones in all the body, how many of you would thought, I'm going to make another person, let me choose a rib? I don't know about you, but I don't understand. But what does the rib cage do?
Protection.
Protects what?
Heart, the lungs, all the vital organs.
Okay. So it's vital for you as the Isha to protect his heart. You ever consider that that's the strongest point where the ribs meet? It's not your job to break it. It's your job to protect it. Men, it's okay if you need protecting. Sometimes we get to the place where, and many a time you'll look at a brother and he's downcast and you'll say, how you doing? And he'll go, I'm fine. I'm like, no, I can see something's wrong. What's going on? He goes, well, I'm dealing with this. Financial troubles, sickness, whatever. This last trip, we had to deal with one of our brother's fathers passing away after 8 years of cancer worries. And as much as he would put on this face and he goes, I'm okay now, we were still able to come alongside him and say, it's okay. It's okay, we're here. We're going to just take that one step. And whether it was just being in his presence as a support structure, or just sitting over there asking him to, I remember when your father said this, or remember when he did this, or just as men, sometimes when we sit around a table or a campfire or something, we just like to be silly sometimes, and then you just make the brother laugh. But we were able to be that. Now, wives, you get to be that every single day. It is something, I like to use this, but I think it's apt to the day when sometimes you get invited to a wedding, and it's the build-up is generally for the bride. You've got this very nervous fella sitting in the front there, hoping that he's not going to be left at the altar, shaking everybody's hands, making sure everybody's seated. generally looking, and I've been the privilege of being in the stands, being sitting next to and standing in front, and like just calm down, man. Just keep your eyes on me. Everything's gonna be fine. And then all of a sudden the music starts. There's a nod at the door, and then the hands start to shake a little bit more. And then it's the flower girls, and then it's the bridesmaids, and they're all smiling. You're going to see your wife now, my boy. Your eyes are going to pop. You won't believe how beautiful she is. And that moment he turns and he sees her, he just forgets to breathe. Some men start leaking. And it's just... And it's that moment. You can either take his breath away, or you can take his breath away. If we have to cultivate this thing, if you have to cultivate this thing of God's design, marriage should look very different in our congregations than the way the world does it. Okay? Now, there's an interesting dynamic here while we're just dealing with the wife. Proverbs 12, verse 4. Says, a capable wife is a crown for her husband. So if we do it right, it's something that he wants to show off, wear proudly, head up. Yeah. And we spoke about this once, where I've shared this with someone. It's like a couple got newly married in Plet. And one day he's a school teacher, so I was helping out with the kids. We were in to do a beach cleanup, and he walks up to me and he goes, "Hey Vince, how's it going?" I'm like, "Oh, good, thanks, you." And he goes, This is my wife." And I go, "Hello, wife." Never gave me her name. And he goes, "This is so and so, oh, and we got married too long ago." It's like, this is my wife. And for him, it was this moment. It was his crown. All the world to see. This is the one I've chosen. But notice it says a capable wife. You become a crown. Listen to the next line. But a shameful one is like rot in the bones. How do we go from a crown 1 second to rot in the bones? The very next line. You're supposed to be that rib. You're supposed to function like I told you. But somewhere along the line, you took your eyes off the prize, you took your eyes off me, and then you made this marriage about yourself. And God knows, I think everybody is guilty of that reality when it comes down to marriage. We lose sight, maybe of the commitment or of the planned picture. This is a Genesis reality. God's like, I made it like this. I want you to see, when you're looking for a companion and it's not good for man to be alone, this is your gift. Wife, this is your gift. Now work like we work together. Ladies, you've done very well so far, so let me pick on the men for a little bit. We're going to go to 1 Peter. Yeah. 1 Peter 3. We're going to read from verse 1 to verse 8. Huh? Yeah. Well, sometimes There's those moments, and again, the Bible is amazing in places where it kind of tells you this is what you look like when you get it right, and this is what you look like when you get it wrong. So if I understand the worst position, and that motivates me never to be that guy or that person, it's going to push me to go, I need to be more cautious so that I can make sure on that one. Ladies, your aim should be to be a crown. The only way you're going to do that is if you reflect God. He might not like you all the time, but He will love you all of the time. 1 Peter 3 says, in the same way, wives, submit to your husbands, and spoke a bit about that. That means understanding that you are accountable. I'm going to break that up now in Ephesians. So that even if some of them do not believe the word, they will be won over by your conduct without you saying anything. Do I need to say that slowly? Without you saying anything. Your biggest testimony is not what comes out of your lips, it's what comes out from your feet. Every believer should understand that. I love that saying. Preach the gospel wherever you go, and if necessary, use words. I should know who you serve by just watching you. As they see your conduct, without you saying anything, as they see your respectful and pure behavior. Sorry, ladies, we're going to get to the men now. Sometimes men would want your respect more than they want your love. It sounds foreign to you because you would want the love more than the respect. It sounds really weird when you say it. That if you would just give him a gap and say, so one of the most, out of all the ceremonies I've been to and conducted, I remember this one moment where a pastor was, well, it was really a pastor's son, but he became a pastor, but what he shared with this couple that was standing in front of him, he says one of the most touching things his wife ever told him was, I'm your number one fan.
I'm going to.
I am your number one fan. I'm the one that's going to be in your corner when there's no one. Don't you ever forget it. She understood that her job was to motivate him, to cheer him on, to help him to be better. Even when he didn't think he could take another step, she was going to go, come on, you can do it. We need to get to a place where the person I can trust most in my corner is my spouse. And I know that God is with that person. Your beauty, your respectful behavior, or respectful and pure behavior, your beauty should not consist in externals such as fancy hairstyles, gold jewelry, or what you wear. Rather, let it be your inner character of your heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit. In God's sight, this is of great value. This is how the holy women of the past, who put their hope in God, used to adorn themselves and submit to their husbands. The way Sarah obeyed Abraham, honoring him as her Lord. You are her daughters if you do what is right and do not succumb to fear. You husbands, likewise, conduct your married lives with understanding. Yeah, sometimes we become more defensive than understanding. A wife comes to you and says, yeah, but I just think you should. And you immediately take offense and you go, well, if you just want to do it that way, you don't want to listen to me, fine. What's the bother of even talking? You're just going to tell me I'm wrong. You understand where that's coming from? Your level of insecurity. You imagine if God comes to you and he says, listen, don't do it that way, rather do it this way. How many times do I respond the same way if that's my insecurity? almost like an adult watching a toddler trying to put those little shape blocks into the thing, smashing it, not getting anywhere, can't understand why, frustration builds, and he waits patiently. Instead of just taking it away, snatching it and doing it for him, he waits for the toddler to bring it to him and goes, help me, I don't understand what I'm doing. Oh, we have to look for the shapes. Look, triangle, triangle. You look there, triangle. Whoop. Light bulb. Sometimes we need those moments. We have to seek counsel. We have to seek understanding. And if I do not value my wife's opinion, if I do not understand that she has been given to me as my helper, maybe God has spoken to her about a situation and says, listen, my love, why don't we pray about it and let's do it this way. Then maybe I can just go, you know what, actually, let me trust God in this moment. Let me trust you. And let's pray about it. He says, although your wife may be weaker physically, you should respect her as a fellow heir of the gift of life. If you don't, your prayers will be blocked. Why isn't God answering me? Why doesn't God listen? Maybe you should look at the way you treat your spouse. I have such a loving relationship with my father, but I don't love my neighbor. Such a loving relationship with my father, but Father, this person whom you have given me. You can hear Adam in that, right? Why did you do this? That woman whom you gave me. There becomes the shift in responsibility that we need to be very careful of. Okay, let's go to Ephesians chapter 5. We're going to read from verse 22. I'm going to read from verse 21. Submit to one another in fear of the Messiah. Wives should submit to their husbands as they do to the Lord. Why would he say that? To give man a little bit of an ego complex. Why would he say it? Submit as if you submit to the Lord. Don't shout at me, it's not my instruction. Why? But why can't he say, submit as if you were to submit to someone whom you respected? Submit to him as if you liked him. A much easier verse to expound upon.
Isn't it also something to do with reflection? I mean, Yeshua reflects God, whereas he's saying here that the wife should reflect that same relationship to her husband.
Right. Okay. So it's a husband's responsibility to reflect who then?
Christ.
And it's a wife's responsibility to reflect who? The bride of Christ. If God pitched up, if Yeshua pitched up and he said, my beloved, will you do this? It should come with the same intent and same love that if I reflect him correctly, my wife's natural position was, I love you, I trust you, I know you're praying about this, so if you say move to plate, no. Well, she said praying behind, I hope you're right. Father, if he's wrong, please tell him to stop selling my house.
I bet she rejoiced.
There's a process where you've got to go, I'm allowing, I'm giving you this gift of submission because I know that you're submitted to God. And my job as the bride is to submit as the bride. Remember, men, you have to lead as Christ. You don't get to lord over. You know, meekness meekness is a word that we mistranslate in our minds. Meekness is this quiet person. Biblically, meek is someone who has all authority underneath him, all power, but doesn't flaunt it. When he came riding on a donkey, meek and humble, I want you to hear the King of the universe has just appeared. I know, if he just clicked his fingers, there would be legions of angels and they would clear out whatever he disliked and he would establish his own reign in a heartbeat. And what did he do? Cried for the people. A donkey was a sign of royalty in those days, not humility. King Saul rode on a donkey. I have all authority, but it's not about me, it's about you. So husbands, when you look at your spouse, and you understand you have to be about daddy's business. Look carefully. It says, because the husband is the head of the wife, just as the Messiah, as the head of the church, is himself the one who keeps the body safe. It's your job to listen to Yeshua, to listen to God, because he's going to keep the body safe. It is your job to be submitted to him. It's his job to protect. It's his job to provide. It's your job to listen. We have, again, a misconception of masculinity in this place. Unless you have 13 black belts and 44 guns and can bench press a car and earn 6 figures, you're not a man. Look at the ultimate man, Yeshua, and tell me what you hear the world say and what he did, and you tell me that lines up. He didn't even own his own house. And you hear the enemy lying to you because, oh no, you might be going through some financial difficulty. Oh no, you're not big enough. Oh no, you're not strong enough. Oh no, you're this. If we had to look at biblical manhood, we would have a very different picture. Just as the church submits to the Messiah, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Be accountable. Remember, what you do affects the house. What you do affects the heart. Men, what you do affects your crown. As for the husbands, love your wives. It doesn't say lord over. It's a very interesting dynamic that Paul sets up here. Because it's easy for a man to walk in generally and just be focused on himself. And Paul uses this opportunity to tell you, hey, listen, your focus should be on her. Love is work. It's an action. Love is not just a feeling. When you don't feel like it and you do it anyway, that's love. Because she needs it more than what you do. When you put yourself second and you lift them up, as Yeshua did, that's love. He says, just as the Messiah loved, the church indeed gave himself up on its behalf in order to set it apart for God, making it clean through the immersion in the mikvah, so to speak. Let's just pause there. The point of my love is to help set you apart as something that belongs to God. So if I love you right, you should run to him. In order to present the church to himself as a bride to be proud of, without spot, wrinkle, or anything, but holy and without defect. If we would just take the time to make sure as the bride of Christ, that our wedding dress isn't completely stained. Take the time to prepare, to make sure that we are right. This is how husbands ought to love their wives, like their own bodies. For the man who loves his wife is loving himself. Why? No one has ever hated his own flesh. On the contrary, he feeds it well and takes care of it, just as the Messiah does the church, because we are parts of his body. We have to understand, marriage is bigger than us, and congregations are bigger than us. Therefore, a man will leave his father and mother and remain with his wife, and the two will become basar echad. It says there is a profound truth hidden here, which I say concerns the Messiah and the church. However, the text also applies to each of you individually. Let each man love his wife as he does himself, and see that the wife respects her husband. So when we come down to a Besar Echad, a oneness, you've been given now a little bit more understanding of what it means to fulfill that role. But there's an intimacy that we maybe need to go into. Now, I've been talking for just over an hour. Do you guys want to have a bit of a break, and then we're going to unpack that? Okay? Because I think that's probably going to be a 30-minute discussion. Okay. So as we kind of left off in a session, we were trying to get maybe a little bit closer to this Basar Echad thing, which is literally one flesh. Okay? Now there's this, again, we have to look at these examples of, if we are to look at one flesh or oneness, what is he trying to tell us? Because again, I've had the discussion with a few people, and they said, well, there is only one God. Echad. And then we go, no, there's Echad, which doesn't mean one singular, but as in a unity with it. Okay? So as we already started to unpack, in the first line of Genesis, we saw one of God's titles. What was it? Elohim, right? In the beginning, Elohim created, and Elohim is not a singular word in Hebrew. Elohim is not a dual word. What I mean by that is the way you pronounce certain things in Hebrew is, if we go, I have one yad, I have two yadayim, and if I have three hands, it's three yadim. So three or more is always just a straightforward im. So Elohim. It's not Elohim, as in dual. So we're looking at something with three. Now, why do I bring up that point? Right?
Because in a marriage relationship should be him and then husband and wife.
Part
He's
of.
the-
Yeah. Well, he's the very thing that holds us together, right? Like we said, we have this in the midst of our creation, and this is a union that God created. But when we want to understand the fullness of Echad, when I say to you Echad, there should be something that you sang this morning and something that you probably recite from time to time. There's a portion in Deuteronomy. What's it called? Shema, right? So let's go to Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6 verse 4, and I will remind you that this is not just I don't want you just to focus on this from an Adam and Eve perspective, but because we're looking for Yeshua and understanding our rabbi and his interpretation of things, we also have to pull from that aspect, right? So let's work back. So Yeshua and the Shema, how do they correlate? When do they ever meet up in the text?
When he says the greatest commandment.
Right. So when they come and they ask him and they say, Rabbi, in your view, what is the greatest mitzvah? And he says, specifically in Mark, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay? Hear and listen, O Israel, the Lord is God, the Lord is one, Echad. Okay? And that's a unity, Echad, again. So he's pulling back from the purpose of Adam and Eve, and he's saying there's an Echad there. Not a singular as in one person, but there's a unity. So he gives him an understanding of saying, listen, okay, if you're going to look at the Shema, we need to understand that from a point of unity. But it is also the greatest instruction we have. All right? So why is it the greatest? Why isn't love your neighbor greater than Shema Israel?
Because he's the creator.
Should be, but I mean, I could make this about if God's saying this is about creation and you understanding each other and it's about marriage and the echad part, surely it'd be love your wife as you love yourself. You see, what he does as a rabbi is he pushes you back into the text. And remember, when you break up the 10 Commandments, he says, well, if you're going to be in covenant, if you're going to be belonging to him, understand what this covenant represents. And the first 4 mitzvahot, or the first 4 instructions in the 10 Commandments, deal with what? Me and you, kid. This level of worship needs to operate first. Let's take it back to the marriage part. He said, I'm going to love my wife not because she's always deserving of my love. If I base it on whether she's deserving, then, well, she's not a nice person today. I don't feel like loving her. But what happens if it comes down to a point where I'm going to love you even at the point where you are unlovable? Now, why would I do that? Because I'm not loving you on your merits. I'm loving you because God loved me that way, and I'm going to reflect Him perfectly. Now then, we're dealing with a different reality. Have you ever loved your children when they were unlovable? No. Never. They've never driven you completely potty, and then you're just like, oh, you're adorable little child. I remember going through a very difficult patch with Jaden when he was about 2 or 3, and that kid would not wear long pants in the middle of winter for no other reason. He had some sensitivity issues. And every morning when we had to go to school in the middle of winter, and I'd be sitting there going, all right, let's go. Knowing full well there was going to be fight and snot and trona. There's just no other way to describe it. And Daddy would have to sit there and hold him down physically and pull his pants up and get to the point. And he would fight me tooth and nail. Eventually, I'm just like, Father, what is it about this lesson? What am I supposed to be getting? How am I helping the kid? Because I've told him, if Daddy doesn't, you're gonna learn. I've used that angle, didn't work. I pleaded with him, didn't work. So, Father, what is the lesson? It didn't work. No bribery or corruption with that kid. He'd eat your chocolate and still shout at you while you put it in your pants. The point was that when I got to the place, I said, you know what? I'm going to show him that I'm not moving, and I'm going to be so firm and so stable here that after I got his pants on, I would sit and I would just hug him, and I would just hold him, and I would hold him until he stopped crying, and then I would wipe away the tears and say, Daddy loves you. Are you ready? Come, let's go get your backpack. We're going to school. And I was meeting him at his need, not reacting to that reality. And I think sometimes when we deal with our personal relationships, I'm so focused on what you're feeding me, I'm not focusing on what I'm getting here first. When God pursued me, when I would quite willingly and quite happily ignore His existence. Tell me you have not felt maybe a little inkling of that in your marriage. I'm happy if you're on the other side of the house. Let's just stay there. But then in some way in the midst of this, there is this innate desire to come and see if you're okay. I'm not here to hurt you. I have chosen you amongst all these other people. I will love you with a fire in my heart that no other person can understand. Let me be that Yeshua type of love to take that step forward. This is the first part of the Shema. Are you going to hear and obey? Is this about a worship reflection of God or Yeshua and his bride? Is that what I'm doing? And the second part of that, love your neighbor as you love yourself, hinges off the next 6 mitzvot. It says, look guys, in a relationship, we've always got to have one side and one side. It's only when we pull together that we really start to move. The body is not one piece over there, 17 pieces over there. Oh, wait, Gary wears the same sunglasses as me. I'm going to go down and start my own congregation 5 meters away from his house. It becomes so much bigger than that. We have to go, listen, how do we develop this unity? And unfortunately, we become so focused on our own interpretations, our own agendas, and our own insecurities instead of Yeshua. And we miss the echadness that he had with his Father as much as the echadness he has when he invites us into covenant. It's going to take two. And with this, it's a full invitation. And he says, you know what, we're going to walk, sometimes we're going to be walking uphill. Sometimes you're going to get tired and I'm going to have to hold your hand and help you a little bit. And sometimes I'm going to get tired and you're going to have to hold my hand and help me a little bit. The reality is we need to walk. Because only in that drawing together, when you're pulling together, will you get to the place of understanding an intimate relationship. It is something that we witness it, but we never apply it back to a biblical narrative. When you see a couple that has been married for 30, 40, 50 years, you can tell the mood from across the room with a look. I better go and save that person. He's saying all the wrong things. My wife's about to, or maybe sitting there having a conversation and the wife looks across and goes, you're tight. Yeah. We go home then. I think so. She's not tired, but she sees that you are. So she's going to come and meet you at your need. Not a word gets said across a crowded room, and somehow there's communication. Now, if you take that reality and we go, this is covenant, this is the greatest mitzvah, and Yeshua looks at you and he goes, that's the type of relationship I want. You don't get that? Remember Adam and Eve. What do you mean? Well, let's just take that little snapshot in Deuteronomy. It says, hear and listen, O Israel, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, He is your God. Hear and obey, He is your God. You've already made that declaration. Adonai Echad, He is one. The invitation is that, remember Yeshua, may we become one, or they become one, as we are one. Are we? If we're missing it in our marriage, we're missing it in our congregation. And you are to love Adonai your God with all your heart and all your being and all your resources. Isn't that funny? Sometimes I love him with my words, but not with my feet. Sometimes I love him with my feet, but not with my money. Every fiber of my being, with everything I have, we don't. The question then becomes, why do we hold back? Is it an untrusting thing? Is it a selfish thing? Is it a refusing to surrender or submit thing? What is it? We need to get to the place where Father knows best and His best is my best, and I might not understand what's around the corner, but I'm going to let go, okay? Catch me. I learn to sometimes you learn to take those baby steps with your spouse. And this is what makes marriage extremely difficult, is sometimes trust gets broken in a relationship. So what do? Do I throw in the towel? Or do we sometimes sit down and have a heart-to-heart and then forgive and move on? Oh, but remember that last time. Or, well, you never listen to me. Or you don't respect what I have to say. Guys, if we're doing it here, then we're most likely doing it here. So if I'm taking the fullness of saying, okay, well, he says, I need to love with everything I have. And he says, these words that I'm ordering you today are to be on your heart, not just in your mind. This is not an intellectual reality. This is a heart condition thing. And you are to teach them carefully to your children. You are to talk about them when you sit down, when you're traveling on the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as a sign on your hand and put them as a headband around your forehead. Write them on the door frames of the houses and on your gates. He says, I want you to be so infatuated with me that you cannot keep quiet. You can't wait to have a conversation. Can you imagine Adam sitting there for the first time looking at this woman? What did he say? Oh, this is awkward. He said, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. It's you and me. We've got all this. And we're walking with God. We have all this. And it's you and me. How many of us in a kingdom mindset understand that in a marriage? And if we had to carry that into congregation, understand that we stand here as the bride. Am I making my theology all about my understanding, my interpretation, my this, my that? Or am I making it about Christ? It's such a dangerous thing that we do in I'm going to call it the messy antics and the Hebraic whatevers. We are so busy making it about ourselves that we've taken off our eyes of the simple commission of becoming like Christ. We're supposed to be a tselem, a copy of Him. And if we are so busy majoring in things that He never spoke about, or acting in a way that He never did, you are making your own copy. I'm not submitting to that reality. I'm not surrendering or becoming echad because I want to do it this way. When people ask me, what do you think? Am I giving them the text or am I sharing my own theological or spiritual interpretation of what it says? At what point do I lose my spouse in that? At what point do we walk away from each other? In a marriage? When it becomes about me. In theology? When it becomes about me. In discipleship? When it becomes about me. So when he talks about echad and the fullness of unity, and he says, listen, if you understand this is Elohim and it's a plural reality, can you show me the dividing line between where God the Father starts and the Son ends? Can you show me the dividing line where the Ruach HaKodesh is in between the other two? Can you clearly show me how, as the Father functions, the Son is completely oblivious? Now, a lot of this gets very maybe technical or complicated when we start dealing with triune discussions. But the very base of that reality is I should be able to look at my marriage and go, listen, if I'm looking at Joe, I know Anne's involved. That every decision he's going to make affects his wife. He knows that. And every decision Anne makes is going to affect her husband. It's going to affect their family. It's going to affect their representation of who they are in the kingdom. And there's a unity about it that we are simply just lacking. And a kindness that God, Yeshua, prayed for. But how can I become one if I refuse to do that? How can I be accountable? How can I learn to think the same? How can I surrender myself? If you don't know what that looks like, remember the words of your rabbi. Not my will, but... Oh, we pray it, but we don't practice it. You know, the condition of the, let's call it again, the Messianics and the Hebraic ruts, sounds more like the book of Judges to me than anything else. Every man did what was right in his own eyes because there was no king in the land. My interpretation, my denomination, and I'm not following after Yeshua in any way, shape, or form of that. In fact, I'm reinventing what Yeshua taught. Guys, that is not going to lead you down a road of unity. Separating ourselves for the sake of whatever piousness we think we're going is also going against it. Separating yourself from the body, separating yourself from your spouse. I need alone time. I need you to be quiet. I need distance. God, I'm not talking to you right now. I didn't get my way. We have to catch ourselves in those moments. That when we look at our spouses, when we look at our marriages, that again, the reflection is, am I acting like Yeshua? Are you acting like the bride? Are we walking in unity? Are we pulling in the same direction? Again, our marriages would look very different if I understood just the very basic. Ladies, you were always meant to be a crown. You were always meant to protect his heart and his lungs. Don't become the rot. And men, you were called to love. You were called to lift up. Like Christ did. You might be sitting here, you might not be in that marriage scenario anymore, but those simple truths apply as the bride of Christ. Am I reflecting him as a crown? Am I the one going, you will not talk bad about my Yeshua? Am I the one that's going to protect the Ruach in the midst? Or am I going to become the rot in a congregation? Slowly but surely, there's nothing but brokenness I leave behind. Being Echad is again an invitation of intimacy and growth and a level we probably don't always understand. A place of sacrifice, a place of surrender. But it's a gift. Just like Yeshua laid down his life for you before you even chose it. That simple, selfless reality of, I'm not here for me, I'm here for them. When service becomes more important than being served. That my desire is to love you the way you need to be loved in order to understand how much I love you. And that gets reciprocated. And if I carry that from the mountaintops where God meets with me into the home, there will be a unity. There will be a oneness. It won't always be easy. But you will start to sound different. You will start to walk different. You will start to act different because you know this is bigger than you. If Yeshua says, come, we should be dancing down the road with him. Not making excuses about all the things we've got to go and do before. The greatest mitzvah, it's always been about heart condition. It's always been about relationship. It's always been about leaving self at the door so that you can become what you're supposed to be. Does that make sense? Okay. Any questions about what we've done in chapter 2? Going to build on this a little bit in chapter 3 next week, but I also wanted to give you guys a little bit of a chance maybe to ask questions or share a little bit about what you guys discussed while we were away. You happy with that? All right.